story and part of the Raise Your Voice project. Just going to set the scene a little bit to explain where our current push for comprehensive, inclusive relationships and sexuality education has come from. It's the kind of thing that we've been asking for from the women's sector, and I know LGBTQI plus sector as well has been asking for it for like decades at this stage. But we really felt that it was important to do this push at this time because firstly, it fits within the work that Raise Your Voice has been doing around education. Really, there's so much that can be done to prevent the number of incidents of sexual violence, sexual harassment, and indeed domestic abuse and domestic violence as well, that isn't being done because we don't have good RSE in schools. So this particular push came about because of recent discussions in, I suppose, what you would call the public sphere about violence against women and girls, where it comes from, what can be done about it. And it's really important and really useful that we're about to get a violence against women and girls strategy, hopefully, for the first time here in Northern Ireland. Of course, all of our colleagues who work in the domestic abuse and domestic violence sector have pushed for this for a very long time. But the purpose of a strategy is not just to deal with these incidents when they happen, or to put in place things around law or around rehabilitation or anything like that. The purpose is really prevention. So it would be better if before anything got to the justice system, a crime or a harmful act was prevented. And for that, how do you prevent anything? Education is always a cornerstone, really. So we really want a really good strategy to come out of this, but also we don't think anything can be really comprehensively achieved without education in schools. All of our children go to schools and then go on to live an adult life. So if we can get all children in schools and it's mandatory so they can't opt out of it, then we can go a long way towards preventing this problem. Now, I mentioned why it has to be mandatory, but a question sort of is, where do we go from there? What else does it have to be? So we keep saying comprehensive because we wanted to cover all of the topics we talk about in Raise Your Voice in our workshops anyway, things like recognizing sexual harassment, recognizing what is consent and what is not consent, putting together in your mind the connection between sort of low-level sexist comments, low-level homophobic comments, and more serious crimes at the top, and seeing how they relate to each other. And also of things like victim blaming and understanding how all these things work. But also it's about being inclusive, because right now, and I don't want to preempt some of our speakers who are going to come up later, but right now our RSE tends to focus overwhelmingly on heterosexual relationships with the assumption that that's what most people will be in. So there's all of that, but also we really need to make sure that it's something that is on the curriculum and it is taken seriously. We wouldn't accept children leaving school at the age of 16 or 18 or whatever it is, not understanding how to do basic arithmetic, how to read, how to write, and how to express themselves. This is something that they simply cannot get through life without doing, forming relationships, romantic and other kinds of relationships. So they need to have the tools to recognize, what is an abusive relationship? What is a good relationship? What does the model relationship look like? And then apply all of that knowledge to their own lives so that they can recognize what is right and what is wrong within relationships, so that they know if they're being abused, for example, or that they know if they've done something wrong and they can actually understand it. And this will make all sorts of differences, both to the individuals who are affected directly by these harms, but also to our wider society, because we have a huge problem with, for example, juries who are made up of ordinary, everyday people not recognizing certain issues, and also perhaps believing some myths that are out there that we need to bust apart. So the current situation is that schools are allowed to apply RSE. They have to have RSE of some sort, but they can choose what they have based on their own ethos. In practice, this means we have colleagues like Common Youth who do fantastic work in schools that they're invited into, and then a huge swathe of schools where the Board of Governors and the school itself gets to decide who they have deliver RSE. And very often it's a 1 hour or a couple of hours long across it to cover an entire lifetime. And it's simply not inclusive enough or comprehensive enough for what we need. So RSE, just to be clear, stands for Relationships and Sexuality. So it is not just about sex. People can figure out quite easily what sex is and how it works. It's much, much more than that. So that's what we're asking for, and we have put together an open letter that we are sending to the Education Minister. We've sent it around some of the organisations that are on this call, and we're going to speak about why they've signed it. But also we are opening it out to the public within the next couple of days, and we're hoping to get lots of the public to indicate that they support this call as well. We really believe that we owe this to the young people that are going through schools right now and to society as a whole. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to pass over to the first of our speakers, who's Stephen McGinn from Relate NI, and he's going to speak a little bit about why he supports this call, and then we'll move on to some of the other speakers. So thank you.
Thank you, Elaine, and hello everybody. Thank you for having us along tonight. We would totally concur with a lot of what you've just said there, Elaine, specifically that point that, healthy relationships are the cornerstone of a thriving society. So, not only do healthy relationships give our lives meaning, but they're actually really fundamental to our health and our well-being, and they're the basic building blocks to our well-being and to children's life chances. Conversely, we know that, poor quality relationships are worse for our health than none. So, loneliness, adverse childhood experiences, domestic violence and abuse, mental health, these are all issues where poor quality relationships are often a stress factor rather than a protective factor that they could be. So I guess, one of the reasons sometimes people would push back against calls for RSE in schools in Northern Ireland is there's this assumption that children and young people will learn and understand what healthy relationships are because they see them modelled around them in society, maybe in their families or in their communities. And that might be the case for some, but from our experience of supporting people in their relationships for over 70 years in Northern Ireland, we know that that's not actually always the case. That's not what's happening. So, and that's not just for children who are maybe subject to adverse childhood experiences, but even, children who are born into the most loving of families, they might not then necessarily experience the diversity that can exist in healthy relationships. So maybe if they're, in regards to same-sex couples and parents or single parent families as well. So, it's important to teach them about the breadth of healthy relationships that can exist in society and in their peer groups and society at large. So, for us, providing RSE is essential to improving kind of children's outcomes and really people's outcomes throughout the course of their life. By introducing this in our schools, we're giving them a place to explore issues around what healthy relationships look like, yes, but also giving them the skills to recognize and negotiate unhealthy relationships should they occur, and that's obviously really, really important. I would ask the question, if we don't do this in schools, where else are children getting this information? They're getting misinformed through, their peer groups who are maybe likewise misinformed through the internet, through things like pornography and different things like that. So that is can be damaging because in some ways it's creating unrealistic expectations of what relationships are supposed to look like. So especially true for when young people come of age and they're maybe exploring romantic relationships. They can really have, it can really increase anxieties around what that looks like and how it has to look like if they haven't been given the right information. And, it can also lead to the normalization of abusive behavior and, misinformation around sexual health and stuff as well. So I would just like to say, make reference to the Belfast Youth Forum's NI Use report, which I know was within the open letter, which we signed. So, they made the point that RSE, when it's often talked about from an educator point of view, from an adult perspective, and it fails to explore, what young people themselves already understand about their rights and their readiness for relationship and sexuality education, what they think is age appropriate, because that's something that we always, some of us are often saying is age appropriate. So what they think is age appropriate and how they feel it should be delivered and who should be delivering it. So, going forward, I think the Department of Education should work with youth organisations, with the women's sector and queer sector organisations, and develop an appropriate syllabus which is inclusive of the diversity of relationships and healthy relationships that can exist, and that will subsequently allow young people to improve their life chances and develop healthy relationships, which are so integral to our health and well-being.
Yeah, thank you so much, Helen, for the invite this evening. It's really great to see so many brilliant organisations unite together in this important campaign call, and I really echo a lot of what Stevie said. We at Rape Crisis recognise that our current relationships and sexuality education is lacking in adopting a comprehensive approach that empowers young people to not only make decisions about sex and pleasure, but to also have agency over their bodies and to identify relationship abuse. We firmly support a call for RSE reform that takes an inclusive, age-appropriate and comprehensive approach through providing honest information on relationships, consent, pleasure and contraception. We're all here this evening because we acknowledge that our current RSE is limited, largely focusing on the risk factors involved with sexual activity and the biological aspect of reproduction, and has very little or almost non-existent focus on how to lead safe and healthy relationships. We have really done children and our young people a huge disservice, and we've disempowered them by not equipping them with vital information and skills to explore sexual identity, relationships and intimacy from early learning through to their teenage years and into their adult years as well. Look, I understand this is painful to hear, but 1 in 5 women in the UK are sexually assaulted during their lifetime. And most of these cases do not occur when a stranger jumps out of a bush or out of an alleyway. They happen with someone familiar to them. So that can be a friend of a friend, a colleague, a family member, an ex-partner, or often even a current partner. In fact, statistics worldwide show that sexual violence by someone you know is on average 90% more common. So somewhere, somehow, something has gone wrong. We have allowed gaps in RSE to widen when it comes to consent, boundaries and communication. We've failed to empower young people to ask questions, use their voice and have a better understanding of what consent means, how to give and ask for consent, and that consent can be reversible or withdrawn at any time. When we make consent a core topic within the RSE curriculum and equip our young people with a robust understanding on consent that is embedded in all aspects of education, everyday life and conversations, only then are we going to create a cultural shift in attitudes to heal the structural inequalities that lead to sexual misconduct and abuse. Judge John Gillen has also recommended a focus on consent within comprehensive RSE as part of the Gillen review into the law and procedures in serious sexual offences, recognising the role that this plays in prevention of such crimes, and has made repeated calls for high quality RSE to be implemented across all schools. We join Sir John Gillen in his repeated calls. We have waited long enough. We must act now to ensure that we no longer fail our children and young people. In adulthood, we are too late. By then, our culture and media have already sent out a ton of messages in the wrong direction. And research shows that the more we talk about healthy and red flag relationships, sex and agency in the late childhood and teen years, the less likely it is that abusive dynamics will arise. And if they do, the more likely personal advocacy will be present. We have all grown up in a culture that promotes assault and harassment through movies, music, advertisements, and comedy. We are fed stories about unhealthy relationships that are presented as romantic, seductive, or humorous. And these damaging depictions of relationships and sex only perpetuate a concept that we call rape culture, meaning social attitudes that normalize and trivialize sexual violence. Now, there's no hiding behind the fact that NI has a rape culture problem. We have seen how high-profile rape trials have unfolded and that victim blaming is prevalent throughout our society. People are sooner taught not to get raped instead of being taught not to rape. Accusations are often not taken seriously and sexual harassment continues to be tolerated. Image-based sexual abuse is rising and sexually violent crimes of local celebrities are sometimes ignored. We firmly believe that the societal sidelining of these issues link back to an outdated, regressive, or often non-existent RSE curriculum that does very little to prevent these damaging behaviours occurring, and if left unchallenged and ignored, can lead to rape and serious sexual assault. I have a statistic here that in the year ending in March 2020, the Office for National Statistics estimated that 4.9 million women in the UK had been victims of sexual assault in their lives. Around 900,000 men had experienced sexual assault too. In 2019 and 20, there were approximately 3,500 sexual offences recorded by the police in Northern Ireland. At Rape Crisis, we are exposed to the reality of sexual violence throughout NI. We understand too well the immediate need for an updated RSE curriculum in all schools that will help children and young people learn the skills that they need to help them embark on safe, healthy and respectful relationships. The sooner the Education Minister takes on board this campaign call and implements a standardised, comprehensive and compulsory RSE, the sooner we believe it will have a life-changing impact on wider society in terms of reducing alarming rates of domestic and sexual violence.
Thank you so much, Helen and Katrina and everyone who has gone before me. At Homeless Period Belfast, we echo everything you've said. And we firmly believe that our earliest interactions with relationship and sexuality education shape who we are as children, young people and adults. The way that RSE is taught to us informs our own relationship with our body and our interactions with others. If those teaching us are uncomfortable or misinformed, then the person learning will be even more so. We strongly support new and consistent RSE reform that focuses on safe sex, consent, LGBT+ relationships, reproductive health, and menstrual awareness. We have a responsibility to our young people who have continually been failed when it comes to RSE. The arrival of the first period can be a relief and even celebrated, but for some households, the arrival signals further financial stress and can be shrouded in shame, disgust, and fear. We have successfully called for free period products in all schools, but believe that these should be available in all public spaces. If young people can't access the advice or the products that they need at home, then it must be provided by educators using a new updated RSE programme. Language is instrumental to the success of this, and we must really re-examine the language that we use when we discuss periods. You know, sadly, more often than none, we hear about negative experience when it comes to periods, alluding to a lifetime of struggle and a cross to bear attitude for menstruators. And negative language around PMS, such as crazy or use of the word sanitary when discussing period products, are incredibly outdated. The sexualization of young persons who bleed is also incredibly concerning. When your first period is equated to your body's potential to produce life, this can be terrifying and incredibly dangerous for young children and adults. First periods are commonly referred to as becoming a woman, which is incredibly triggering for some and suggests that menstruation is something only women can experience. Not all women menstruate and not all who menstruate are women. This is regressive and outdated language that we urgently need to reform. When we don't speak about periods in a positive way, we create a narrative that periods are dirty and they shouldn't be discussed. We also create a culture of shame that encourages young people to suffer in silence. Updated RSE programs, which encourage positive and empowering discourse around periods, would really enable our children and young people to feel proud of their period and their bodies and encourage them to speak up when issues arise. Through our line of work, we have learned of so many cases where extreme cramps, leaking, lack of period products are reasons why children and young adults are missing out on vital education because they're too ashamed to ask for help. In recent surveys we conducted, we found that 48% of girls aged 14 to 21 were embarrassed by their period, 68% admitted to hiding period products up their sleeves, and 42% of women have experienced period poverty and period shaming in the workplace. It's actually abundantly clear that this shame follows us into adulthood too. We have heard of too many devastating cases of gynecological cancers killing people who were too embarrassed to speak about their symptoms. Gynecological issues such as endometriosis and polycystic ovarian syndrome are taking up to 10 years or more for a diagnosis. We believe that this wouldn't be the case if we were properly educated as children and young adults on the symptoms and when to see a doctor. We are calling for urgent, updated RSE programs on gynecological health issues because too many have died suffering in silence. This lack of dialogue creates shame that we carry with us our whole lives. If we teach young people from a reformed curriculum, they will be equipped with the confidence to speak about many RSE related issues candidly. If they're able to recognise at an early age their needs, this enables them to vocalise other issues they're faced with, be it relationships, their sexuality, gender identity, or consent. In recent workshops that we have delivered over the last 3 months, over 300 young people have expressed an urgent need for RSE reform surrounding menstruation, as many feel confused about the symptoms they're experiencing. According to a study by Plan International, 15% of girls didn't know what was happening when they got their first period. An additional 43% said they had no idea what to do when it started. When we asked those young people what we can do about this, the most popular answer was, of course, more RSE. This would encourage young people to continue the conversation outside of school as well, as they would be equipped with more information. But most importantly, they said that we need to stop separating children when learning about RSE. The conversation is important for all young people from the very, very beginning of their education. Period positive, progressive, and up-to-date language is the key to a successful RSE program, which teaches self-love and self-respect at its core.
Thank you very much for inviting me here tonight to speak. I work for 2 organisations, so I work for both Here NI and Carfem, both of which are in the LGBT sector. I'm the domestic violence support worker for women and girls, LBTI women and girls, and I'm the only one in the region that's paid to do the job that I do. I've a few short points, a short statement to read tonight, and obviously I could talk about this for hours on end, as I'm sure everybody else here can. And from listening to the speakers before me, it seems that a lot of what I have to say is singing off the same hymn sheet as everybody else. So for too long, RSE within our schools has had very little substance within the curriculum, and it's based on a heteronormative relationship. For those of you who don't know what heteronormative is, I'm sure most of you do, it's where the heterosexual is the default relationship. There's a male and a female. And that means that it excludes all our young people who are not heterosexual, and our LGBT young people especially need to see themselves visible and reflected within the curriculum, within schools and within society. At the minute, there's an LGBTQI plus strategy that's been formed, and there's an expert panel who've been working on that, and they have stated that one of the recommendations is that all young people have access to age-appropriate relationships and sexuality inclusive education, which is universal and not dependent on the school ethos. And this is, we're just echoing what everybody else has been saying here tonight. Currently, our young LGBT people are sitting through RSE that is not reflective of them or of their lives, and it excludes them. Not only do we need RSE within schools to be inclusive, but it needs to be inclusive of all minority communities, including LGBT. Most young people within schools will identify as a minority sexual orientation or gender identity when they're in full-time education. These years, in particular, secondary education, therefore formative years for LGBT young people, building their understanding of their identity and allowing them to develop a sense of self and self-esteem in regards to minority and identity. This requires an understanding and visibility of LGBTQ plus people, where they learn the history and experiences to normalise this minority identity. Research commissioned by the Department of Education entitled Post-Primary School Experiences for 16 to 24-year-old people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual and or transgender reported that 90.4% of respondents, that's almost everybody, indicated that the LGBT relationships had not been discussed at all in RSE in schools, and 2/3 of respondents, which is 66.6%, stated that sexual health education they received was either unhelpful or very unhelpful. There has been a historic invisibility of LGBTQ+ people in Northern Ireland, including within education. This invisibility impacts on LGBTQ+ young people and also those who are educating them. Teachers cannot assist LGBTQ+ young people and their experiences if they've never had training or education on these things themselves. The Education and Training Inspectorate published a report of the evaluation of relationship and sexuality education in post-primary schools in January 2011. A survey amongst staff showed that the two main areas that were needing further support are the teaching of issues associated with sexual orientation, where 78.2% said they needed further assistance in coping strategies to deal with challenging scenarios, including domestic violence and child abuse. This shows that staff feel they're ill-equipped to deal with pupils who need support in LGBTQ+ issues. Our RSE should educate young people on consent, what a healthy relationship looks like, and then obviously from that, an unhealthy one, the diversity of relationships and what they can do and who to ask if they need help and if they find themselves in an unhealthy relationship. Without educating our young people, this will cause a lack of awareness surrounding sexual health, leaving our young people believing myths such as you can't get pregnant your first time, and women who sleep with women don't need a smear test, along with many, many more that come out of peer groups. Educating young people also means that we can let them learn from factual sources instead of accessing education from sources such as pornography. Our young people also need to learn about different family dynamics. We no longer live in a society where nuclear family is the norm. We have many different variations of families, such as nuclear, single parent, same-sex, blended families, and so on. Educating young people on diversity can only give them the opportunity to become inclusive. By educating our young people on what healthy relationships looks like, we have the opportunity to educate them on domestic and sexual violence and what this also looks like, and how we can work on seeing abusive behaviours and who to go to for help if you find yourself in an abusive relationship. I'm available anytime. If anybody has any questions, they can email me at Carfriend or Here and I, but I'm going to pass on to the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I'll take these off. There's too much glare. My name's Alexa. I'm one of the directors of Transgender NI, which is a human rights organisation supporting and advocating for trans communities in Northern Ireland. We have a community space in South Belfast called the Belfast Trans Resource Centre, which unfortunately has closed because Corona, everything. For us, for me, RSE, I think is one of the key issues for trans equality, gender equality across the board, and is key to addressing so many issues facing marginalised young people in schools, like bullying, with sexual harassment and violence. It provides not only an opportunity to address issues around consent and healthy relationships and abuse, but also to teach at all stages of education about the diversity of life, about the diversity of life experience, the diversity of bodies, of relationships, and so on and so forth. I'm not too far out of school myself, and to be frank, all we got was icebergs and babies from, shall I say, quite a prevalent relationships and sexuality educator in Northern Ireland. I believe about 70% of our schools get their RSE from this particular organisation, who I won't name. And it took an abstinence-based approach. It took a kind of Christian approach to the education, teaching nothing about healthy relationships, but rather instructing a room full of teenagers to simply avoid sex at all costs, which, would you believe, didn't work. It's, pretty useless for pretty much everyone. But it's also focused kind of solely on, as has already been mentioned, a heteronormative and cisnormative view of relationships and bodies, assuming that no one in the room was lesbian, gay, bisexual, and or trans. No mention of safety, healthy relationships, pleasure, consent, nothing. And it's failing our young people, it's doing them a disservice. Our schools are genuinely failing to prepare our young people for the reality of life. You know, we all have sex, we all have relationships, and we are taught virtually nothing about how to have them in a good and healthy way. Change is absolutely needed. And if or when that change comes, it's so important that any new RSE program is inclusive of trans people and trans lives and trans experiences, that it doesn't kind of take the this is what a boy does and this is what a girl does kind of view and splitting people up and, you know, all this nonsense. It doesn't work. It doesn't lead to good results. And also that it's kind of delivered throughout the educational journey. We can teach people about how to have a healthy friendship in preschool, in nursery, and in P1, about how to consent to a hug, and, you know, how to say no and how to establish boundaries. These are all things that kids need to be taught, not just teenagers. So it's important to have it kind of throughout the educational journey. But realistically, if you're at this event, I'm probably preaching to the converted. And I know that you're absolutely going to go after this and sign our open letter because you're all wonderful. But I think on a day like today, when Twitter has been abuzz with kind of jokes about Arlene and everything is all jovial and kind of, you know, maybe letting our guard down a little bit, it's worth reminding ourselves that someone more hardline is probably coming down the road after her. It's also worth reminding ourselves that when there was a kind of left-wing Sinn Féin education minister, nothing was done about this. There was no action taken on RSE, nothing changed. We can't rest on our laurels here because we think we've won the battle. So yes, write to your MLA, raise it with your child's school even, ask them what RSE they teach, and obviously sign the open letter. It's the most important thing. And finally, if this is of any use to any of you or even an interesting read, we have a sexual health guide for trans young people available on our website at transgenderni.org.uk/resources, which was written by my colleague Ellen a few years ago. It's really comprehensive and, you know, inclusive, gender neutral, talks about prosthetics and healthy relationships and pleasure and hormones and binding and lots of other stuff. So it's a really, really useful resource. And yeah, thank you so much to Helen and Elaine for organising this wonderful event, and to everyone else for listening to us banging on about what I hope you would agree is an incredibly important issue. We really appreciate the support.
Hi everyone, thanks for inviting me to speak. I'm one of the activists with Alliance for Choice, and for those who don't know, Alliance for Choice is an activist collective campaigning for free, safe, legal and local abortion care, specifically in Northern Ireland, but as part of a wider global reproductive justice movement. This campaigning helped lead to the decriminalisation of abortion in Northern Ireland in October 2019. And our most recent work has been pushing for the Department of Health to commission abortion services. As we've seen how precarious these services are, they were only offered during COVID because of the closure of contraception and family planning clinics. And we've even seen the Western Trust in recent days close their early medical abortion service. Alliance for Choice also supports those seeking abortions in Northern Ireland and still those travelling to Britain, something that we hoped would be less of a concern after decriminalisation. However, it's still work that needs done. The CEDAW report, specifically on abortion in Northern Ireland from 2018, revealed what we always knew. Not only were women and pregnant people criminalised for seeking safe abortion at home, they were also not being given the tools to prevent unintended pregnancies, as well as knowledge around healthy, consensual, and fulfilling sex and relationships. Abortion should be seen as just one part of sexual and reproductive health for people, including menstrual health, puberty, pregnancy and childbirth, menopause, and access to all forms of contraception, including long-acting contraception and emergency contraception. The spectrum of people's sexual health during their lifetime is being fueled by both education and healthcare. It's really both prongs not working for anyone in society. And this begins when we're children with the lack of age-appropriate relationship and sex education. The stigma, like those facing who are seeking abortion services, really compounds on the barriers to accessing care. People may be reluctant to get a pregnancy test if they're concerned. People will be reluctant to reach out to general practitioners, reach out to families for support because of stigma they experience and fear of shame. And this shame and secrecy is also nothing new. It's something we've been living with for decades, but it begins in school too. I vividly remember being one of the young people getting sex education, and my own sex education was abstinence-based, as Alexa mentioned, the same Icebergs and Babies course. And I specifically remember watching an anti-abortion propaganda video. I remember writing furiously on the back of the page a complaint because at that time I was vocally pro-choice in my school, but I don't know how other people felt about it. I didn't really speak to them, and it wasn't really something talked about within my school. I remember even at the time feeling let down by both my school and the government. I remember for the first time then getting contraception as an 18-year-old from Brooke, which is now Common Youth, and I was too scared to tell anyone. I was scared to go to my own GP, and even when I went to Brooke, I asked them not to tell my parents, which is absolute basic information that I should have received from my education, that your GP or your healthcare provider can't tell your parents if you're an adult, never mind if you're a teenager with guilt competence. It's completely unfair to expect people to inherently know that access to sexual healthcare is one of their human rights, considering even people in my year in medical school didn't know that this was their right when we were earlier on in the years in medical school. Unbiased and non-judgmental information on consent, contraception, and pregnancy options is essential to ensuring positive sexual health for young people and throughout their lifetimes. And we know young people deserve even so much more than that. They deserve to know about consent. They deserve to know about LGBT+ relationships, pleasure, and the gap being left by our current relationship and sex education is being filled by societal myths about sex or pornography. The NI Executive Formation Act, which is the act that decriminalised abortion, also mandated for comprehensive relationship and sex education on the basis of the CEDAW recommendations. This is a legal obligation that our government is failing to meet and seem to have no interest in discussing with key stakeholders anytime soon. Any contact that's been made with the Education Minister has been ignored, as well as his legal duty to review relationship and sex education. The reason Alliance for Choice support this is because abortion care and reproductive justice is inextricably linked with access to inclusive sex and relationship education. And this is why we will continue to support the demand for RSE in Northern Ireland.
Thanks a lot, Helen. So I'm project coordinator for NIWEP, and for anyone who doesn't know us, we act as the link really between the Northern Ireland women's sector and the national and the international level. And one of our key roles is to coordinate the civil society report to CEDAW. And we were among the organizations that originally instigated the CEDAW inquiry into abortion legislation here. And really, I'll be very brief because I just support and echo what already has been said, and in particular what Jill just said. You know, comprehensive, age-appropriate and mandatory RSE was one of the recommendations in the CEDAW report, and it's one of the areas that there has been absolutely no movement on whatsoever. You know, it was highlighted in the CEDAW examination report in 2019, and it's just frankly scandalous that it is going completely unheeded. You know, when everywhere else in the UK, for that matter, it is now mandatory. So it's another way where Northern Ireland is falling behind everywhere else in the UK, and our young people are being failed fundamentally. And again, you know, it has already been said, and I loved how Alexa described it. Our view is that really this should be mandatory, age appropriate from the earliest ages. It is about celebrating life and the diversity of people and bodies, and really needs to start at the earliest ages. Because if we just focus it in the very negative way that it's happening in, say, post-primary age, that's when a lot of prejudices and entrenched views have already crept in, and that contributes then to other problems, from patriarchal norms to domestic violence, gender-based violence, and all of those things. Is much more difficult to challenge even if it was done in a positive way at post-primary age. So we really think it needs to be an inclusive agenda from the earliest ages. And again, as I think Amanda said, we actually don't think it's enough that it's just in schools. It should also be part of teacher training, because it's not, we know that teachers feel uncomfortable, but this is part of what it is. And we know that, from research that has been done, that young people think that the experience is very bad, but they still think that school is the right place to do this, because home can be uncomfortable. And obviously people are not necessarily, people might have faced different issues discussing these issues at home. So that's really, I was going to say, just to finish off, because I had a conversation with my 16-year-old daughter just before I came on about this, and she said that really it is about healthy relationships in the broadest sense that young people need to know. But one point that she made was that it also should, schools really are the place where young people should be able to access help and support, because they do experience unhealthy, abusive, coercive relationships, and many of them don't know where to go. So her call was that could there be people actually trained in schools, to listen to them, to help them where to go, because as she said, the reality is that, that if they go to the police or anyone else, they're worried that they might not be believed. And that's where schools could have a role as well, which is probably an extension of it. But that's really, what I think we forget, how fundamentally important schools are to young people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak briefly about the issue of religious values, because it's kind of the elephant in the room. Well, Alexa, you mentioned it briefly earlier, that a lot of why the current approach exists in schools is because schools want to maintain freedom to teach according to their religious values. And if the schools don't have strong particular values around that themselves, they want to ensure that they're keeping the parents happy who may have religious values. And when you leave this kind of education to parents, again, it's going to have, it's going to be different in every family based on how they interpret their religious values. So I just wanted to speak from a faith perspective and to say that there are a number of people in this meeting tonight who come from faith organisations that are more progressive, Andrew from Left Side Up and a couple of others, that it's really important that we put the diversity of religious values out there, because human dignity is a religious value, equality is a religious value, justice is a religious value. And the theologies that we have in Northern Ireland around sexuality are only one brand, if you like. There are great theologies of the body and of what our sort of humanness, the importance of our body and our spirituality all linked together, the importance of inclusion of LGBT people within our religious communities, those all exist in Northern Ireland as well. So I think we need at every opportunity to put those forward as important values to people of faith here, and not let the very conservative fundamentalist interpretations of those things be the only religious voice.
Yeah, it's fair to say that we have had a lot of support from the Unison different branches and other trade unions as well, and we will be chasing that. And this is only the start of a campaign. Raise Your Voice was set out to do workshops in community and community settings, and it's just mushroomed from there to lobbying and campaigning and respond to consultations and delivering to young boys and men. And it's great that we have a government that is now going to commit to a violence against women and girls strategy, but we know we are going to push them up that hill like a big heavy stone, and we are going to have to make sure that they introduce this. And I think seeing from the wealth of organisations that have spoke today, it affects every part of our lives. Nobody is exempt from a lack of RSE education, and we know that all our lives will be better for it. And I can see in some of the chats there, people saying around mental health as well. All of those things impact. So, I mean, this is an investment for the future. So we look forward to taking the campaign a lot further. This is just the start of it, and we're all part of it together. And I thank everybody for coming along. Is there anyone else who would like to have an opportunity to speak?